Good afternoon, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session hosted by Splunk with our partner Accenture. I am Blanca Galletero, and I lead Splunk's go-to-market ecosystem organization here in EMEA. Joining me for today's discussion, here with me, I have Mark Boots, Chief Technical Advisor, EMEA at Splunk. Hello, Mark. And Brian Berg, Principal Director at Accenture. Hello, Brian. Welcome.
Hi.
Today's topic is what should a board know about tech in 2022, which ties back to Splunk's Executive Predictions ebook, which is available to download. So right now, first of all, again, welcome and thank you for joining me here, Mark and Brian.
Thanks, Blanca. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having me.
There is so much happening right now in the technology space, let alone each individual global market. So we would like to know, how does an organization keep up nowadays, and what trends do they need to keep an eye on, which ones they need to invest on, and we are going to be discussing some of these topics today. So to kick off, Brian, one of the things that we highlighted in our predictions ebook was that 2022 will all be about the last mile of customer experience. What do you think that actually means, and how should a board be thinking about customer experience in 2022?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have seen over the last 18, 24 months a very aggressive shift in changing the way how we operate our businesses. Obviously, due to exogenous shock in terms of COVID pandemic, and it really accelerates a lot of technical implementations and transitions on our client sides. And especially the way we are operating with our customers is a major shift or a major change in kind of the technology which is used. And obviously, customer experience is at the cornerstone. How to deal with the customers, how to achieve and get to the customers, and how to create customer journeys completely changed over the last 24 months. I give you just one example. There's a Shopify survey that 75% of consumers really tried different brands during the kind of pandemic lockdown situation. So that really shows how it is impacting the way we have doing business, but also the competitive situation, and requires immediate action for many clients. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. Mark?
And I think it becomes interesting when you have that dynamic, the expectations that you have, be that in consumers, where actually, as Brian was highlighting, that expectation is I have an unlimited shop front. I have all the choices in front of me, and it's easier than in a physical environment. But even in a business perspective, even in a business-to-business environment, in the past where we've said, well, actually things have to be done a certain way, what's changed over the last 2 years is the realization that things can be done differently. And when we start to focus in really on that customer experience in the last mile, when we were still in the old world of thinking physically, that meant a physical last mile. Actually, now we've got these wider ecosystems that are loosely connected, not necessarily physically. And we saw this in supply chains, and we saw this in end consumer interaction. And in that, guys, it's only how much data you have, but more importantly, the context you have on that data. Most large companies have incredibly large data lakes, huge repositories of data. But it's that context, both in terms of what's important for the service and, more importantly, for the customer, and how real that is. How real are those interactions? Where does it go beyond Mark happened to dwell on this page for just a few minutes for the reason that I was interacting, and what might be happening in the background for the services that I'm interacting with.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brian and Mark. That takes me into, do we think that maybe we can now and are ready to move from a reactive customer experience to a proactive customer experience by leveraging data in the right way? Is that what we are saying, that we are ready?
So let me maybe jump into it, and I think that's perfectly fitting to what Mark just said. So we as Accenture are calling it kind of learning from the future, which is an interesting term. It kind of changes the way understanding data and how to use data. Rather than focusing on the past for insights, leading organizations are really using data analytics and AI to make decisions and define strategies that anticipate the future. So it's a complete shift of mindset how to use the data. And obviously it requires a different technology behind it to enable that kind of future looking decision making in a more predictive way. And that's really, really a game changer from my perspective.
And the challenge then for boards and for leadership teams is that that's just not possible for everything. You can no longer, especially for some of those crown jewels or those critical services or products, you can no longer afford to just say, well, actually, once I get to that decision-making point, Brian, could you take that away and come back to me next month? Because things have moved on. But we also can't afford to say, well, actually, I'm going to have full visibility in real time across my whole organization. That'd be lovely to achieve, but practically with the resources that we have in place, it's just not quite there. So when it comes to customer experience, one of the challenges for leadership is where do they prioritize? And then understanding what right time means for them. In certain services, being able to respond within minutes is critical. In other ones, actually, it's more like hours or days. And understanding those differences means that you can apply different technology. But importantly, when is it going to help you make a decision or change something? And if that is required in seconds, then you're talking about automation. If it's something that's critical, if it's something that actually is nuanced and you're not necessarily going to be able to understand it, then you need to be able to pre-arm a person or a team as quickly as possible to make sure that they can then make that decision. And that allows you to understand where is it that I can start to consolidate things with automation? Where is it that I can actually spend more time understanding? And where is it that I actually need to be directly integrated with those teams that actually make the decision? If you think about launching a new product, then actually that's happening all the time and continuously now. So actually having that a system where you have to start to elevate that decision further and further and longer is not the sort of thing. So leadership has to set those directions and the priority and really make sure they're invested in the right area. And then importantly, on the other side, empower those teams to make quick and timely decisions, because that's where they're really going to start improving that customer experience.
And that's also changing the dynamic of the business. There's a very good example also from the pandemic situation. There was an AI developed drug just within 12 months, which is crazy compared to the typical cycle times of, 4 years, 4.5 years for a typical development cycle. So that really shows what kind of Mark was just saying in terms of changing the process, changing the way we work, we operate, and really accelerating the cycle times. Yeah.
And then in those cases where you are accelerating those cycle times, where you are really empowering some of those teams, the important thing with customer experience is that we're not thinking about thin customer experience. We're not saying, well, actually, Mark engaged 5 times, and that's a good experience, or even waiting for some of the qualitative feedback to come back. We have to understand the process and systems that are critical to it or generating part of that customer experience. And then that goes right round in a loop again, back to what Brian was saying, this learning from the future. What indicative things can I see that are genuinely going to impact customer experience? And when I can't, let's make sure there's enough linked data that's real that I can go back and investigate that. If something happened that was unusual, if something happened that was not expected, there's no point in most common architectures of saying, well, actually, now I'm going to investigate. You have to have made the investment up front, knowing that at some point that unknown will happen, and you have to have that responsiveness built in to your data collection system.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to both. So I take it that, meaningful, conscious, dynamic, and relevant customer experience is top of mind, for our executives. So thank you so much. That takes me nicely into our next topic. Now I would like to talk about edge computing, which is now, it seems that this is the year when it arrives, right? We also included this as part of our predictions document. And this is all about people getting closer to the customer. I think this is going to be continuing to be driven by consumer devices, but ultimately it will all be about improving the customer experience, as we were saying before. So how do you feel edge computing adoption will progress in 2022? Is it already a board level topic, and how feasible is it? Mark, would you like to start?
In terms of the technology itself, it's completely feasible that you would have it and deploy it. It's been proven quite widely in consumer devices. In fact, if we all stopped now and looked in our pockets or picked up the tablets we have beside us, we've already got devices that are doing lots of the heavier workloads on the edge, on the device itself. And there are plenty of researchers and proven technologies that can allow these areas. Once again, with this technology, it's more about how it's going to be implemented and for what. Because when these systems come into place, there's lots of things that edge computing can enhance. One of the core things that we're going to have to start thinking about is the actual experience itself. Lots of people are talking about augmented reality. They're talking about actually how do I present some of the smarter models to consumers nearer where they are. But actually, one of the benefits that you can get there is being able to protect data itself and to make sure that it's not actually moving back into a centralized system. Those are two different sides of the same coin. But actually, we need to understand, are we trying to do it to improve security, to improve privacy? Or is actually what we're trying to do as a primary to try and speed some of that customer experience? Because in a leadership position in those companies, understanding that makes a very different way of initially deploying that technology. When we think about this in areas, it generally tends to break down to actually making sure that those hygiene factors of security and privacy are in place, making things that we at the moment have to wait until they're updated as a model or they have multiple links in the chain, and move those nearer and nearer to where that actually needs to happen. So in manufacturing, in telecommunications, in actually most consumer applications, that has a massive benefit. And then once we have the connectivity, once we understand how those businesses are going to connect together, then we can start to make those smarter decisions and actually have those opportunities to really delight in certain areas. And that's where I really think things like augmented reality come to the fore.
Fantastic. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, very spot on. And two ideas come to my mind listening to Mark. He was saying technology is kind of the cornerstone, but not everything. And that's pretty similar to what we believe. And we kind of tend to say in the discussions with our C-level clients, it's about pushing it to the edge, yes, but it's also about decentralized decision making. So at the end, you can call it like an edge organization which needs to support the technology architecture of the future. So really responding quickly, agile to the new kind of abilities in terms of sensor data, all the decentralized data. So it needs to be hand in hand in terms of organizational readiness as well as technology readiness. And I think that's a very important point to stress. And also connecting it to the earlier discussion on consumer and customer experience, I think it's just another enabler of changing the way we operate and changing the way we address our customers. That's one very favorite example I like to tell often is it's about Starbucks. Yeah, they call it the digital flywheel strategy, where they are really trying to automate many elements of their kind of customer experience in coffee shops. And it's really amazing. They are using the company's loyalty data, which spans across like 19 million of customer data, and contextualizing it with such indicators like day, weather, media posts, and personality of individual store environments. And they're kind of predicting what the customer want to have, what suggesting drinks and food options. So it's really amazing in terms of using all that data at the edge or from different sources, combining it into kind of a very intensive user journey and improving kind of the customer touch point and the customer experience. But also using that data in terms of an IoT perspective and connecting kind of their sensors and their espresso machines, very, very interestingly, to some use cases like preventive maintenance. So it's kind of an all-in cloud. They are collecting all that data and using it for many, many use cases towards the use case of, at the very end, identifying staffing needs on the amount of kind of espressos in the different stores. So it's really impressive what you could do if you also adjust and adopt your operating model, your organizational procedures to really benefit from all these different data points from the edge.
And it is in those priorities what you're trying to achieve. So you can clearly see from Brian's example some of the real value that can be achieved in some of those cases, but actually looking to say there are certain things within the way in which I operate the business that can really benefit from being automated, especially if that can happen, that decision making can happen nearer and nearer to where that there's no point in those cases of actually quickly centralizing for all the coffee machines, having a decision loop that goes around and runs a model, checking in with a central manager, and then pushing it back down to the coffee machine to say, at the moment, we should probably be producing a little bit more coffee or grinding those beans. By the time that's happened, the customers have probably passed through or become frustrated. On the other side of that, as Brian's saying, those enhanced customer experiences, the benefit of potentially being able to do some of this modeling at the edge means that actually, if they are particularly concerned about privacy, which most consumers are, you're able to do more and more of that modeling on the device itself if they're using a loyalty app or on a local system, which means that actually that privacy can potentially be protected better, and you're not necessarily sharing personal data or those things. If we move towards those technologies like augmented reality or facial recognition, that's going to be crucial, because as the model starts to learn, and we have this with voice interaction, with visual interaction, that actually we want to make sure that more and more of that learning can be pushed so that when it becomes individual to me, that stays localized and we can enhance that privacy.
Brilliant. So that basically, brings everything together with something that you both have mentioned, and this is cloud computing, which is, one of our favorite topics as well, and one that I would like to highlight. Okay, we have been seeing since the beginning of the pandemic, really, that all those different new emerging technologies and trends are tied together, by cloud computing, by rapid cloud adoption, really. So what would you say a board needs to think about when it comes to cloud in general terms in 2022?
So not just thinking of it as the cloud, as one amorphous thing which can sit there as a bullet point that we should be looking at. I think often when it comes to what looks like an architectural change, that people can be overly focused on cost. And that means that actually when most of those initiatives come into place, that actually it's something we have to do because we're going to reduce cost, rather than actually thinking about value. Is there value in making that change? And if we do make the change, what other value can we actually get from it? Because when it comes down to those decisions to the cloud, it's inevitable that it's going to become part of the mix for any company. But when and how that happens depends on investments that have already been made, depends on the kind of services that you have to produce and the pace you have to produce them. And if you think about the value there, rather than just cost reduction up front, you actually end up benefiting more on the cost reduction further down the line. A simple lift and shift, a simple you must do this, actually normally ends up resulting in an increase in cost, an increase in complexity, and actually quite confused expert resources within your organization itself. So the first point is that shift to value, knowing when and why you're going to be making that move.
Thank you so much, Mark. So Brian, hearing Mark, I can see that this is about driving innovation. Your organization definitely knows, how to help customers to do that. How do you see organizations moving, from shifting to the cloud out of necessity into really driving innovation here?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So recently we have done a research study in Europe, which is called the Cloud Continuum, where we are kind of interviewing like 4,000 executives. And it's quite interesting because it kind of really supports what Mark was saying in terms of the primary drivers for cloud transitions at our clients. So it's really about cost competitiveness. It's the major driver. Like 47% of respondents really made that statement. And there's also kind of a risk associated to that because they only kind of see it as a cheaper public data center, and that's not the kind of purpose of what we want to achieve with the cloud transition. But also, interestingly enough, and that's kind of the hope on our side, the second major answer was like 39%, that increasing customer value is a strong driver for cloud transitions. And that goes hand in hand with that kind of agility and new operating model and new ways of working. However, there's some way to go from my perspective. So the pandemic really accelerated the cloud transitions at many clients. But kind of carefully balancing that different perspectives of cost competitiveness, increased customer value, but also avoiding new data silos. Another interesting data point, like 60% of our clients are having or ending up in what you call hybrid cloud scenarios. So still on-prem data architectures mixed with kind of cloud architectures. So there's, again, a risk of having that data silos. So that's the reason I'm saying it's really important to also have a proper data strategy in place during your cloud transition. But that will enable a lot of chances in terms of really dealing with your customers, creating customer value, improving the customer journeys, and really using that advanced data for future use cases and business models.
I think from what Brian said there, historically, being able to understand these systems has been something that's nice to have outside of those things in security and critical operations, because fundamentally you could always go back to the server tower, the person that had created the system, or your own particular data center, and work that out. As that transition happens between on-prem hybrid environments and the cloud, it's critical that you have a decoupled monitoring strategy. It's critical that you are able to understand the business irrespective of what it's running on, and continuing as you start to adapt more these up-to-date technologies, which actually increase some of the complexity, but it shouldn't increase the complexity of your understanding. So historically, that's been a nice to have. Now it's critical. And when we talk about data silos, those can often occur even if you don't have a hybrid cloud strategy, because one of the benefits of moving to the cloud is that you can start to create more, you can start to innovate more. If there is no central way of looking at what are the guardrails for my data collection, and do I have something that's robust in monitoring, what you do is you create multiple pockets of data at an ever increasing rate. So I think for the monitoring and for the understanding of the business, it's gone from being something that you should do to something that's absolutely critical that you must do in order to be able to generate both customer experience and cost effectiveness.
Brilliant. Any quick advice on how to get started? If there is anybody watching us which is about to get started on their strategy to make sure that they lay out the foundations on the right way to support those new trends, any quick advice from any one of you?
So I can go first in there. So I would say everybody's going to be going through this journey. The first starting point is threefold. One is to understand and to prioritize on those services and products you think are critical to you. You have to start. If you've already started, great. But actually that prioritization provides some level of focus. Once you've got that in place, make sure you understand how you're gaining that visibility and understanding. It doesn't need to be a technical question. It's as simple as asking Blanca, how do we know that? And then you can go through your teams to work out, is it one individual? Is it multiple ways? How is it that we're actually getting that understanding? Because in most cases, you will see a monthly dashboard or a board deck, which gives you some red, green, ambers or some scores. Actually ask the question behind it. How are we seeing that data? If you understand both those critical services to you because you understand your business and ask those questions, that can really start to help you to prioritize where you need more visibility, where it needs to be quicker or where it needs to be deeper. And that really then starts to help when we need to think about quicker, nearer to real time, and deeper, more and more comprehensive that needs that down to data science type strategy. Once you understand those two things, then your cloud transformation journey starts to become clearer where you can drive that value. I need to be able to change things quicker. I need to be able to see things quicker. This starts to make sense for me to move to the cloud. I have something in here that actually is coming to the end of its life and I can't see anything in there. A classic candidate for moving across to a new architecture.
Brian?
I mean, not much to add, spot on. I'm really convinced that the cloud journey needs a smart cloud data strategy, as I call it, the core to win. It's kind of an evolutionary path, obviously, but it's really an opportunity to move from silos to seamless at the very end. And I think it's an opportunity from a technical perspective as well as from an operational governance perspective and organizational perspective. So using that kind of opportunity to do it right once from the very beginning, I think it's now a window of opportunity that's really unique, and combining it and considering the cloud data at the core is really making the difference.
Brilliant. So, okay. Well, thank you, Mark and Brian. It's been great to talk through these topics today. And while nothing is ever certain, a successful 2022 will in large part be down to ensuring the board understands and is making the right technology decisions. I really liked your closing statement there, Brian. A smart data cloud strategy, is what it's all about. We are, here talking about data and the smartness and the strategy. So we do need to make sure that we are capable to take advantage not only of this year's trends, but that we do have a foundation to take advantage of next year's and the year after opportunities that will be coming to us. So, as mentioned at the start of the call, to get a bit more insight into what we think is coming during the rest of the year, do download our exec predictions, which are linked below. Thanks for watching.